Here we are again with World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Healthcare, government option, probably a good idea to compete with these private companies, and we'll get to the most important reason in just a second. The Republican demagogues are telling you, do you want your healthcare controlled by a bureaucrat? Well, you already do. If you have any insurance at all, there is rationing of care being carried out by a corporate bureaucrat, a finance-motivated bureaucrat with his eye on the bottom line, anxious to sacrifice your life to the profitability of an insurance company that has engaged in poisonous derivatives speculation. So you're being asked to die for derivatives on that side. So corporate bureaucrat. On the other side, there will be a government bureaucrat. So corporate bureaucrat or government bureaucrat, isn't it better to be able to choose? Isn't it better to have a situation where you might be able to play the corporate bureaucrat against the government bureaucrat and vice versa to open up some space for the people? I don't think there's anything shocking about that. I don't care about this silly anti-big government stuff, because you're dealing with naked genocidal corporate power on the one side. Get the government into the picture and see what can come from such a conflict. My guess is that the government bureaucrat is going to be more vulnerable to agitation and political demands through the Congress and in the streets than the corporate bureaucrat has proved to be, simply because the government has to make some show of responding to agitation. And if you're skeptical, go out and try it. I can hear a lot of Austrians saying, oh, no, it's hopeless. It's hopeless. Let's just sit around and complain. And what's your program for tomorrow? To complain some more in the Austrian fashion. Well, that won't do it. Get out there and try politics before you give up. Now, here's the most important. You look at these insurance companies. If you leave it all in the hands of private insurance, what's the main problem? That they're bankrupt. AIG is bankrupt. What's AIG? The biggest insurance company in the world is AIG, and it is bankrupt. 180 to 200 billion of federal funds have gone in there. What bankrupted AIG? Derivatives through the London hedge fund, 3 trillion of derivatives, credit default swaps, and the rest of it. So you've also got the Hartford. The Hartford has taken several billion in TARP money, and there's a list here somewhere in my notes of the other insurance companies, but you get the picture. You cannot build your house on the private insurance companies exclusively because they're bankrupt. And that's the dirty secret of the whole thing. Why is Obama so interested in getting health care reform? Is he trying to help the people? Is he really that secret socialist that those right-wing characters would have you believe? No, surprise. He's a Wall Street puppet, and he's convoying. He's finding a way to gouge huge amounts of funds, $600 billion. Another TARP comes out of your hide under Medicare, Medicaid, and S-CHIP and other procedures, so that that can be given to the derivative speculators and the hedge fund hyenas of AIG and so forth. That's the secret. That's the urgency, and that's why the Republicans are saying, oh, no, heavens to Betsy, no public alternative. The public alternative would presumably not engage in derivative speculation, but again, that's up to the vigilance of the aroused citizenry. If they haven't been stupefied by Austrian and Chicago free market doctrine, they may get out there and assert their economic rights. Of course, the Austrians and the Chicago boys say you have no economic rights. Well, I say you do, and I say it's time to assert those rights in a timely way, because if you don't assert them, you have waived them. So that, I think, is the situation on the healthcare front. Now, the other thing this week we got from Obama is financial regulation, and this, of course, is another fraud. Here we have the idea that the Federal Reserve becomes the systemic risk regulator. This is a disaster. The Federal Reserve has struck out 3 times, 1929. The Federal Reserve created the hot money that created the bubble. They were doing this not to create the bubble. They were trying to help the British pound under Lord Montague Norman and Sir Winston Churchill, but that hot money nevertheless went into the Wall Street bubble of 1929. Then the Federal Reserve failed again in the banking crisis of 1932 to 1933. The Federal Reserve failed in the 1990s under Greenspan to stop derivatives. Greenspan became the biggest voice in favor of derivatives, attacking Brooks v. Bourne of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and other honest regulators who wanted at least make it reportable already, Alan. No, says Greenspan. And then, more recently, you look at these places like Wachovia. You look at look at them all. Look at Citibank. Look at J.P. Morgan Chase. Look at all the derivatives monsters, all the zombie bankers that have grown up under the Greenspan-Bernanke era at the Federal Reserve. So the idea of making the Federal Reserve the systemic risk regulator is monstrous. And indeed, you're hearing voices, which you often don't, on the floor of the Congress from all kinds of people saying, wait a minute, the local branches of the Federal Reserve are private entities. They're not controlled by the Board of Governors. They're controlled by regional banking interests, which indeed means the regional tentacles of Wall Street, because that's what it comes down to in this highly centralized situation. So the idea that the Fed, the Federal Reserve, could become a systemic risk regulator and intervene on any company, any financial interest that threatened the stability of the system is nonsense. Then we've got the wind-down authority. As soon as you hear wind down, dear listeners, what do you know is going on? What can be wound down? Derivatives can be wound down. This is all this absurd dance, this kabuki theater of the ruling class, where they've got to talk about the Depression and they've got to talk about the measures they want, but they dare not say, prominently at least in the headlines, the word derivatives, because once you've said derivatives, you have identified the culprit. If it's derivatives, the bankers are the culprit. The bankers are the guilty party. So we're going to have a wind-down authority. If the financial company is at risk of collapsing and would endanger many other companies, the Treasury could appoint the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation or other agency for the orderly liquidation of the firm, or as the Washington Post says, to orderly liquidate the firm. Somewhat tortured syntax. Citigroup, AIG, and all that. Well, this is obviously crazy. Derivatives must be shredded or tax them out of existence, which you can weaken them with taxation and then shred them, or some combination of those two. Think of it as a dialectical unity between taxing them out of existence with a Tobin tax and then shredding them. Consumer credit protection. This is a weak sister. This comes from Miss Prim. The Prim Professor Elizabeth Warren, Harvard Law School professor, heads the panel overseeing the TARP, and her weak and diluted and pathetic and pro forma ideas of regulation would then be implied in a consumer credit protection agency, which is too much for Wall Street but far too little for yours truly here. And then finally, derivatives, but again, they don't say derivatives, shadow markets regulation. It means derivatives once again. So 2 out of 4 directly address derivatives without daring to say so. Hedge fund advisors, all hedge funds, would register and provide information to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and derivatives would be subject to government rules and oversight. Oh, wonderful. We're back to Brooks v. Bourne 10 years ago, but it's only 10 years too late. Too late on derivatives. Now, you want to hear a regulatory agenda. Here's a regulatory agenda. The first thing to do is to squeeze the derivatives bubble with a Tobin tax, 1% Tobin tax, securities transfer tax at the federal level, at the state level. Pile on. Cities can join in too. Tobin tax 1% on financial turnover, starting with derivatives. Existing derivatives, not just turnover. Special category for derivatives. All existing derivatives are taxed at 1%. This will take the life out of the booze for these speculators. Then we're going to have a similar Tobin tax, same Tobin tax applied to stocks, bonds, foreign exchange, commodity speculation, you name it. All speculative money flows. It's the only stream of so-called wealth which has not yet been touched. So that would be the leading edge of real regulation, and you get towards a situation where the derivatives would be